The rebels poured through the corridors and surged up a grand staircase lined with deep red carpet, certain the throne itself waited just beyond. Belfir roared at his men to push through this final stretch, certain nothing left could stop them now. He was wrong. At the top of the stairs, a line of robed figures in yellow and gold stood utterly still, radiating a pressure that froze the charge in its tracks. These were the Empire's elite mages, and they made no effort to hide their contempt, demanding to know what kind of fools would dare cause chaos within the palace's sacred halls. As their voices echoed through the hall, a wave of dark, oppressive energy rolled outward, and many of the rebels instinctively tensed, sensing they had just walked into something far worse than ordinary soldiers. Then came the second blow. From the shadows behind the mages, armoured figures emerged in eerie silence, each one radiating a cold, deathly aura that made the temperature in the hall seem to drop. These were the immortal swordsmen, beings the rebels had heard whispered about but never truly understood. Belfir screamed for his men to hold the mages back while he tried to organise a response, but there was no time to think. The mages struck first, gathering a violent surge of compressed wind and hurling it forward in a single blast meant to crush anything in its path. Rebel spellcasters barely managed to counter it in time, and the two sides locked into a standoff of clashing magical force. While the mages duelled in mid-air, the immortal swordsmen launched their own assault. They tore through the rebel ranks with a speed and brutality that bordered on inhuman, scattering soldiers and cutting down anyone careless enough to stand in their way. One rebel barely managed to block an incoming strike, while another threw himself forward and landed a powerful slash that tore a deep gash straight through one swordsman's body. For a heartbeat, it looked like a real wound. A real victory. But the creature didn't even flinch. Its eyes showed no trace of pain, and within seconds it retaliated, slashing the rebel across the chest hard enough to send blood spraying into the air. Elsewhere in the same melee, the captain of the guard managed to cut one of the immortal swordsmen down entirely, the blade slicing clean through its body. For a brief moment, hope flickered through the rebel ranks. Then that hope collapsed just as quickly. The fallen swordsman's body dissolved into dust, with an unsettling, almost amused expression still lingering on its face, only to reform moments later, flesh and armour rebuilding itself as if nothing had happened. It resumed its assault without missing a beat. Watching this unfold, Belfir felt something close to despair settle over him. He remembered hearing about creatures like this clashing with Roman Dmitri in the past, but he had never truly believed the stories were literal until he saw the regeneration with his own eyes. If the swordsman genuinely could not be killed, the rebellion would be crushed before it ever reached the throne. Then, just as the battle seemed lost, something shifted. The immortal swordsmen suddenly faltered, their movements turning erratic and unstable. Dark, corrupted energy began tearing free from their bodies, ripping through their cloaks and armour as thick black smoke bled out from every joint. They looked for the first time like they were in genuine pain, as though some invisible force sustaining them was failing all at once. Belfir didn't hesitate. He screamed for his men to throw everything they had left into one final all-out charge, recognizing this sudden weakness might be the only opening they would ever get. The rebels surged forward without restraint, swords, spears, and spell after spell crashing down on the crumbling immortal swordsmen, and the mages who had begun losing their composure as well. The fight that followed was short but brutal, and by the time the dust settled, the hall was littered with bodies on both sides. Standing amid the wreckage, Belfir surveyed the carnage with a strange unease creeping into his chest. They had won. The mages and the immortal swordsmen lay defeated around him, and yet something about it all felt wrong. The Emperor of Valhalla was not a man who would simply let his palace fall without a far more dangerous trick still in reserve. It didn't take long to find the source of his unease. Thick black energy was seeping from beneath a set of heavy doors deeper in the palace. Belfir threw them open and found the Emperor sitting calmly on his bed, as though none of the chaos outside concerned him at all. The emperor greeted his arrival with quiet disappointment, acknowledging the betrayal without a hint of surprise, while Belfir fired back that it was the emperor who had abandoned his own people first. With an unsettling, almost amused calm, the emperor told him he had made a foolish choice and raised a hand, clearly expecting to summon the same dark power that had sustained his immortal guardians. Nothing happened. The emperor stared at his own empty palm in genuine confusion, and in that silence, the truth dawned on him. His power had been pulled away from him entirely, which explained exactly how the rebels had managed to break through guardians that should have been unstoppable. Reading this as nothing more than desperate stalling, Belfir ordered his men to seize him. The emperor offered no resistance whatsoever as the soldiers grabbed his arms. Instead, he simply smiled, an expression of genuine, almost peaceful relief washing over his face as he murmured that he was finally free. What followed played out in the city's main plaza beneath the open sky. A crowd gathered around a hastily built set of gallows, jeering and shouting accusations at the bound emperor, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong in Valhalla and demanding his death. Belfir stood beside him on the platform, slipping the noose around his neck and mockingly asking if he had any final words. Rather than fear, the emperor responded with a low, chilling laugh, looking out over the furious crowd as though amused by their hatred. He wondered aloud how many of them actually understood who he truly was, then dismissed them all as pathetic, declaring that it was they, not him, who had truly destroyed the empire. Panic flashed across Belfir's face. Certain the emperor was on the verge of revealing something that could expose them all, he cut him off and gave the order to execute him immediately. The platform dropped, the rope snapped taut, and the emperor's final unspoken thought lingered only in his expression that Valhalla had already been doomed long before this moment. For a ruler who had once commanded an entire era, his end came with almost no spectacle at all. Far from the execution, news of the emperor's death reached Roman Dmitri through a breathless messenger who reported that the rebellion led by Belfir had succeeded completely. Roman said nothing at first, recalling the raw power he had personally witnessed from the emperor in the past. A group of rebels alone shouldn't have been capable of ending a ruler like that. Only one possibility made sense to him. The Kronos Empire must have quietly intervened behind the scenes. A faint, knowing smile crossed his face as he remarked that things were becoming far more interesting than expected. Back within the palace, Belfir allowed himself a moment of triumph, privately congratulating himself for being the true architect behind the rebellion's success, regardless of who officially led it. He dismissed Roman Dmitri as a fading threat now that he held the political high ground, and his thoughts drifted toward the throne itself, the goal he had quietly longed for all along. His celebration was cut short when a subordinate rushed in, urging him to come to the city gates at once. There, the streets were filled with cheering crowds and falling flower petals as the Duke of Vieto made his entrance into the capital, hailed as the hero who had saved Valhalla. Belfir stepped forward to greet him with practiced courtesy, internally unsettled that the Duke had arrived far sooner than he'd planned for. His scheme to position himself as an equal power before the Duke's return was already falling apart, and he was forced to think on his feet. As he offered the Duke a polite suggestion to rest after his journey, one of the cloaked figures standing behind him stepped forward and pulled back his hood. It was Roman Dmitri. Belfir's confidence shattered instantly. Before he could process why the very man he had just dismissed was standing in the heart of the capital, the Duke of Vieto gave a sharp command for the soldiers to arrest the traitor before them. A warrior named Sanchez moved with startling speed, tackling Belfir to the ground before he could even react. Pinned and panicking, all Belfir could do was demand to know what was happening and how he, of all people, was being branded a traitor.